So welcome to Coffee with the Coalition. And if you could introduce yourselves, Tim Shoecraft, just introduce yourself and a quick go over what you do.
Hello, my name is Tim Shoecraft. I work with the Michigan Opioid Collaborative out of the University of Michigan Medicine Anesthesiology Department. I'm a peer recovery project coordinator, so I work with community coalitions and providers to increase access to treatment and reduce stigma.
Kimberly?
Am I on mute?
Nope.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kim Johnson, and currently I am in the process of looking for a new job, but I am a big advocate for people in recovery, for harm reduction prevention here in town. I'm also on the board for Families Against Narcotics.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Tim Hudson?
Hi, I'm Tim Hudson. I'm the behavioral health consultant for the Michigan Opioid Collaborative. I work with Tim Shoecraft. I cover the northern 21 counties here. And as Tim said, our goals, we work to increase availability of medications for opioid use disorder, as well as provide education and waiver trainings for providers and community partners on all substance use disorders.
Okay, Lisa?
Hi, I'm Lisa Anderson. Currently, I'm with Up North Prevention, which is part of Catholic Human Services, and I cover Grand Traverse, Leelanau, and Kalkaska counties. And I live here in Kalkaska, and I chair the Live Well Kalkaska Substance Free Coalition, and I'm part of all the different substance use coalitions in my other two counties. But two of you know this on the screen, but three of you don't. I am taking another position in the near future with the Kalkaska County Commission on Aging as a community resource specialist. I plan to stay a part of the Live Well Kalkaska Coalition because I believe in it strongly, and I've been around with it almost since the beginning. And so, yeah. So there's that.
And we're glad she's staying. And I'm Suzanne Prentice. I'm the coordinator of Live Well Kalkaska Substance Free Coalition. I have a son who is struggling with substance use disorder, and I wear a lot of different hats with a lot of the different coalitions. So next, Janine Wardy, can you introduce yourself? And she is our guest speaker.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today. It's always a privilege to speak and to tell my story. I am Janine Wardy. I'm a Kalkaska resident. I am the founder for a movement here in Northern Michigan called Hope Lives in Northern Michigan, or an acronym NOMI, Hope Lives in NOMI. I am a mom that unfortunately lost her son to suicide. And I'm also an attempt survivor and a lifelong person who battles with the darkness of severe depression.
All right. Do you want to tell us a little bit more your story?
Sure. Well, again, I really appreciate you having me this morning. And every time I tell my story, and I say my story, but it's my son's story also, it brings a measure of healing. And I in hopes, I'm always hoping too that that measure of healing is also felt by the people that I'm sharing with. So my goal today is to inspire hope by sharing my story and my son's story. And it's just so important that we're all holding on to hope, because without it, what do we have, right? So I want to start by sharing some numbers that are pretty startling. In 2019, over 47,000 people died by suicide. And that's one death by suicide every 11 minutes. And those that are thinking about suicide, those numbers are much higher. In 2019, 12 million Americans seriously thought about suicide. And these numbers were all pre-COVID. And we know that these numbers are significantly higher at the onset of the COVID and the ripple effects that are happening, that continue to be happening because of the pandemic. 1 in 4 people that died by suicide have a diagnosable mental health issue or illness at the time of their death. And 1 in 4 young people have voiced concerns about their mental health, or excuse me, their mental well-being the past year. Suicides are increasing, suicide rates are increasing, and it continues to be the second leading cause of death for our youth ages 10, beginning at 10 to 34. And I believe we all need to be talking about our mental health as openly as we talk about our physical health. I read a quote on Facebook the other day that really hit me, and it really rang true, to say that there is no health without mental health. And when we say that, you know, our mental health is our brain. And if our brain is broken or is ill, it affects everything about us. It affects our everything, because it controls our body. So without our mental health, we have no physical health, right? But we have such a hard time because of the stigma that's been attached to talking about it for so many years. We don't talk about it. We stay in that darkness a lot of times, and most times. So it's so important that we're talking about our mental health as easily and openly and normally as we talk about our physical health, and doing everything that we can to remove the layers of stigma that have built up and continue to build up, removing those, so those of us that are dealing with a mental illness are able to talk about it and are able to reach out and get the help that we need. Share a little bit about my story and my son. Sadly, tomorrow, September 29th, is the 6-year date of my son Zechariah losing his battle with his mental illness, severe depression. He died by suicide on September 29th, 6 years ago. We got the call, and I am a completely different person since that date. You can't help but not be a different person. My entire being is different because my son died by suicide. I'm not sure if I mentioned he was 25 years old. He was like many that are dealing with severe depression. And I should mention too that depression is more than sadness. A lot of people don't understand that. You can be sad, but depression is definitely more than sadness. He was, his smile was huge. It lit up any room that he walked into. He was a friend to many. He was an encourager to all. He was a team player. He power lifted when he was in high school, so he was very physically strong. My husband likes to say that Zach was probably the strongest person that he'd ever met physically, but unfortunately, mentally, he was fighting a battle that eventually took his life. He lost his battle. His illness won 6 years ago tomorrow. It is important to say that when someone dies by suicide, and especially my son, he didn't want to die. They don't want to die. They're fighting this pain, this hellacious mental and physical pain that convinces them, this illness and the side effects convinces them that there's no other way out. They're feeling hopeless. Their brain has told them that they're useless, that there's no reason to go on, basically no hope. And it's when someone says that suicide is selfish, that is not true in any way. And it's so important that we say it to them and correct them in a kind way that no, it's not selfish. It is an illness. An illness took my son. And like I mentioned before, 1 in 4 people that die by suicide have a diagnosable or had a diagnosable mental illness at the time of their life. So it's their illness that takes them. One thing that I'm very, very passionate about is talking about suicide safe and being safe and responsible when we talk about that. And one of the words that's been connected with suicide, the conversation around suicide forever, is the word commit. And it's such an unsafe and irresponsible word to use when it comes to talking about death by suicide. When someone dies because of some other illness, whether it be cancer, heart disease, or MS, or diabetes, do we say that they committed cancer or they committed diabetes or heart disease? Absolutely not. So we need to not be using that word when we talk about someone dying by suicide. They died because of an illness. And anybody that I've talked to in the past 6 years, I very gently educate them if they use that word, and always encourage them if they hear someone else using that word when it comes to being associated with suicide, that they also educate them the safe and responsible way to have that conversation. That one word is so important, and it brings, if people would just try to wrap their minds around the fact that it's an illness, and that's the illness, severe depression, whether it be severe depression, anxiety, a personality disorder, a substance use disorder, PTSD, of course, is something that affects our mental health. So it's so important to know that my son didn't want to die. His illness, he lost his battle with his illness.
Janine, I just want to say, we all feel badly for the loss of your son. And, you know, sitting here and thinking about it, that and in our world of combating substance use disorder and the stigma that goes along with that, that's one of the reasons we were so excited to have you here, because so often substance use disorder and mental illness are intertwined, and the public viewpoint and the stigma, the negative implications are very similar for both situations. And, you know, sitting here, I myself didn't really understand depression until it happened to me. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait, this deep, dark pit of despair that you just can't even claw yourself out of. You can't even describe it to people really until it happens to you. And so I just wanted to ask you a question, and you have tons of good information, but one thing I didn't know until you started talking is that you are the survivor of an attempt. Did that change your viewpoint and feelings a little bit, or your understanding of your son's situation?
Oh, absolutely. Depression can also be, it can be genetic. It can also be caused by life circumstances, and both of them intertwined, obviously. It could be the cause, but my depression is definitely genetic. My family, it runs very much through my family genes. And so I didn't know, and that was going to be my next thing that I talked about. I didn't know the signs that somebody may be in a mental health crisis. My son was quite young when I attempted, but it wasn't my surviving my attempt was definitely a life turning point for me. And I had never thought about medication. I had never thought about seeing a therapist until that point. And that was many, many years ago. And I started seeing a counselor. And fortunately for me, the medication that I got on at that time and continues today was the right medication for me. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. We've heard so many stories about people that either as an adult or they're bringing their kids to get treatment, and they try medication and it makes it worse. And then they try another medication and it makes it worse. I'm very blessed to say that the medication that they put me on definitely is still working today. Do I still struggle? Absolutely. Do I still have thoughts of suicide? Absolutely. It's a side effect of the illness that I will have for the rest of my life. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. I was very sympathetic to my son's darkness because I know that darkness, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it very much does. It just kind of ties in a little bit with, you know, unfortunately, mental health and physical health, as you said in the beginning, have been separated for entirely too long, and they shouldn't be. And, you know, a lot of that has to do with our culturalization and our, you know, religious and spiritual beliefs. There's a great PBS documentary that was in a couple of parts, and I saw like the first 3 parts and then they took it off on demand. But it did such a good job of historically telling us how our beliefs about things like depression and suicide came about, because our physicians were also oftentimes our spiritual leaders. And so it was kind of intertwined, and some of that sort of old-fashioned thinking is still with us today, you know, as far as separating the two, and it really shouldn't be. You know, my younger sister had substance use disorder, and they found her slumped over the wheel of her car. She had taken a bunch of different things, and they ruled it a suicide. The coroner's office did. And my mother was very upset about it, you know, and I kind of had to talk her through it, that Mom, either way, she's gone. So the fact that they checked a certain box on a form, because that's what they have to do, doesn't change all that much. It doesn't, but it does. And, you know, her coming from an older generation, and, you know, there is a difference between intentional and unintentional.
Absolutely.
I really think so. Anyway, yeah, but and one of the other things too, though, Janine, that you brought up is your son was 25. I've done some readings, in that young adult age seems to be a point where a lot of folks first start to develop their depression or their other kinds of mental illness. And you know, I don't know if that's the biological part, because it runs in their family and the maturation of their brain. I don't have all those letters behind my name, but I know definitely in young women over the years, I've read a lot of stuff, and they've seen that, yeah, it in you know, mid-20s, it seems, is when depression really starts to come out in a lot of people. So
Right.
I don't know if you've done any reading on that.
Yeah, I have. And that's the time where kids are getting out of either, you know, just graduating from high school. And if they don't have any directions, maybe they don't know what they're going to be doing with their life after high school. And of course, their brains are still developing. And, you know, there's so much for kids, even at 20, to be navigating, you know, especially right now with everything that's going on in the social media and all of that. But one of the things that I felt that was so important to talk about is that 80% of those that die by suicide, they reach out in some way or form, and we either miss it, dismiss it, or ignore it. So it's so important that everybody gets involved in some type of an educational training. And there are many that are happening here in Northern Michigan, to know the signs that somebody might be in a mental health crisis, and be that person, learn how to have that conversation safely and responsibly, knowing what to say and what not to say, and to try to be that bridge that brings them to the life-saving help that they need. So that education piece is so important. I believe that awareness and education and trainings, they will and they can prevent suicide, and it's everybody's job. I don't think you can talk to anybody in your circle or out of your circle that has not some way been touched by loss to suicide, whether it be somebody very close to you or somebody maybe removed from you, but the ripple effects from it. So the education and the training is so important. And
so what are some of those signs, Janine? I mean, are there
ones? There are many, and some of the things that we talk about are changes in behavior, major changes in behavior. And for instance, when my son was in his like 18 and 19. He spent a lot of time in his bedroom, and you think, well, that's just kids, right? You know, teenagers spend a lot of time in their bedrooms, but it's important that we're trying to make that connection with them, even if they're in their bedroom, knocking on their door and saying, hey, just want to let you know that, you know, I'm here if you need to talk, or you know, what's going on, and making that connection with them. And because if they're feeling hopeless, if they have some type of a connection with a trusted friend or family member, that may make them continue to hold on to hope. And so it's important that we're making that connection. So some of the things that I wrote down and that I know about is, if they're talking about dying, or they're talking about being useless, or they're talking about killing themselves, whether it be flippantly, you might think it's flippantly, but it's important that we go with our gut. If you've got a child that maybe you're able to look at their social media, their search engines, if they're looking for ways to die by suicide, or looking for ways to kill themselves, that certainly would be a red flag. Talking about the feelings of hopelessness, having no reason to live. Talking about being trapped or in unbearable pain. Talking about being a burden to others. That's a huge thing, being a burden. Maybe missing school or missing work more than normal. Again, these are major changes in their behavior. Increasing the use of their alcohol or their drug use. Acting anxious or agitated, behaving recklessly, sleeping too much or too little, being in their bedroom behind that closed door, withdrawing or isolating themselves, showing rage, missing work and school, I already mentioned that one, and feelings of extreme hopelessness and feelings of extreme disconnectedness. And again, if you get yourself involved in an education or a training, you're going to learn more in depth about the signs that someone might be in a mental health crisis, and know what to say and what not to say.
What about, it shows up on lists all the time about giving away possessions, although.
Oh, definitely, yes, for
I mean,
sure.
it hasn't been my experience, and I've been around a couple folks that either died by suicide or had attempts, and so I always see that on lists, and I mean, I suppose it's possible, but so you've seen that too. That
Oh, absolutely, yes. And one of the things that when I go back to and think about the conversation 6 years ago, right after my son took his life, is that I learned this, that sometimes if someone has been planning in their head, they get the plan already. They know what they're going to do. They know when they're going to do it. Sorry. They go through a time of euphoria. So apparently my son, he hadn't been in our life for several years before his suicide. But apparently he was in that euphoria period, like a week before his suicide. People that saw him said that they had never seen him happier. And he was a happy guy. He was a happy kid. But they mentioned, a few people mentioned that they had never seen him so happy. So he may have been in that euphoria period where he knew that his plan was going to take place. So whether that's a sign or not, that most people wouldn't look for, but I think it's important that you mention that.
Yeah.
Well,
I know
thank you.
Go ahead, Tim.
Well, first, just thank you for coming in and sharing your story. I know it's not easy. I'm a person in recovery from substance use disorder and mental health, and a survivor of an attempt myself. And it is just like a trap and a hell. It feels never ending. It's as if time stops, and it will never change. And so, I mean, I can definitely relate to a lot of those things. My thoughts on it, it still boggles my mind that mental health is so disregarded. My thinking on it is, we define ourselves, we identify more as our personality. Say if I took Lisa's body and Lisa took mine, and you were aware of it, you'd address my body as Lisa. and hers is Tim. And so that is the mind is me, not my body.
Mhm.
And so to say I have a mental health issue is to say there's something wrong with me.
Mm. Mm.
And that's where the stigma comes in, though. Like, people don't want to admit that. People don't want to say that, but it is an illness, like you said.
Mhm.
And I never thought about the use of commit, like you just pointed out. And I'm definitely going to be mindful of that. It's something that's been in my language for so long that, it's hard to just change those habits immediately, but I'm definitely going to keep that in mind because, I mean, yeah, it does make it sound like so much more of a voluntary effort.
Thank you. I'm glad that that touched you, because I've talked to so many people in the last 6 years that that they look at me and just like you don't think about it that way. And I've only ever had one negative comment with that, and unfortunately, it was with a medical professional. And she said, well, it's been said that way forever. It's going to continue to be said that way. And it's that kind of attitude, excuse me, that continues the stigma to build up, right? Just that simple little word, and just having that little short conversation like I just did with you is so important. And I believe it's life-changing. So thank you. Thank you for saying that.
Certainly,
Well,
that's the idea that keeps all sorts of discrimination around. Is it's been that way, so why change it?
Right, exactly.
And Janine, I like the fact, though, that you pointed out that you gently correcting people. There's a, a mental health therapist that I just love, and he said nobody likes to be clobbered over the head with the truth. Well,
Yeah.
so being gentle, I had to correct a learned person recently who referred to somebody with substance use disorder as a junkie in a training. And at the end of it, I just kind of gently said, John, we don't refer to folks with substance use disorder as junkies anymore. And, he and I, like I said, if I would have, jumped down his throat, it wouldn't have been as effective as me pulling him aside so that he wasn't publicly embarrassed, kind of a thing. And the other thing is leading by example.
Yeah.
So you're right, Tim, it is hard. And I've known about the committed part for years because I've had training. But it is, language takes a while. And how many people in our business still use substance abuse, whether in writing or in speaking rather than substance use. So it just takes a while, and lead by example.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say to you, Tim, that I'm very proud of you. And I want to encourage you to continue to hold on to hope, being in recovery, and to know that you matter and that you just have to keep fighting the fight. And I'm so glad that you're here today.
It can be hard to believe that at times. And I mean, it's definitely something I've put a lot of work into, and still it can be hard to believe that at times. I think the important thing, not the important thing, but one of with conversations about things like that word is when people ask why. And then it can be explained and a discussion can occur. And I mean, changing the language is very important on these things, but the ideas behind them persist even if the language changes.
Yeah.
And so it's very good to hear that people are at least willing to have the conversations.
Yeah, I think if you notice too, I don't watch a whole lot of mainstream media, but you will notice that the local stations here in Northern Michigan, I've had several conversations with producers and with some of the personalities or the news people, and talking about reporting about suicide in a safe and responsible way. And you'll notice that a good majority of them, I would say 99% of them, are not using the word commit anymore. They're reporting in a safe and responsible way and using the language died by suicide, and not reporting on the the method used. That's so important that it's not important to talk about the method. The family and the circle of family and friends, sure, if it's appropriate, age appropriate, if you've got kids, but on the news, reporting the method is absolutely irresponsible. But I'm personally very proud of our local media and the way that they have in the last 3 or 4 years change their language and are reporting in a safe and responsible way.
Words and images are very important, and I know I didn't really notice it as much until I was immersed in this business, but media that uses pictures of spoons and needles and other kinds of things, that can be really triggering to people. And you know, once again, we've been trying to sort of educate and teach them that, you know, really, is that necessary? Are you going for shock value? Or are you going, you know, to report the news? Because you know, if people are fighting those battles, I remember a coworker of mine died in a horrific car accident, you know, years ago, and I was equally incensed because they showed the wrecked car and then they showed her shoe laying there at the side of the road, you know, and it's like, are you kidding me? Her family is watching this, you know. It was just and it's, I think in so many ways, once again, we get desensitized by having the news in the background and not really paying attention until it affects us personally. And then all of a sudden, it's kind of like when you buy a car and you don't notice that kind of car on the road, but if you have that car, all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's a Volkswagen, there's a Volkswagen, there's a Volkswagen. No, but you never noticed them all on the road before until you bought one.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
A quick, go ahead.
I was just going to say too that, you know, suicide, loss to suicide is so complicated. There's so many facets and it can be so isolating. And so it's so important, and especially I can say personally, and my husband would say the same, that if you have experienced a loss to suicide, that you try to get into a group with people with lived experience. It's so important because people with lived experience have been my lifesaver the last 6 years. And I'm certainly not an expert on this at all, but I just share my lived experience the last 6 years and what I've learned and what I continue to learn on a daily basis. So it's so important that people understand that, that we be kind, that we think before we say something to somebody that may have just experienced a loss to suicide. I've had some pretty cruel things said to me and continue to be said to me in regards to Zach's suicide. Sometimes the best thing that you can do is to sit with somebody, sit close to them, maybe have your hand on their knee or your arm around them and just say, hey, listen, I'm here to listen, and completely shut your mouth and just listen. Sometimes that's all we need instead of being talked to or spoken to. In my experience, I sometimes have a hard time closing my mouth, but it's very important that you know that there are people, if you've experienced a loss to suicide, that there are people out there that understand and to that you can reach out and get the help that you need. There's so many whys and what ifs when it comes to a loss to suicide, and we had so many of them. We joined a group called Grief Share at our church in Traverse City. It's Michael's Place in Traverse City is also doing, it's a 6 week Grief Share course. It's a nationwide program. And one of the sessions was dealing specifically with loss to suicide. And they talked about the whys and the what ifs. And if we had the answers to our whys and what ifs, we wouldn't have Zechariah back. So 6 years ago, we said to ourselves, and they encouraged us to say this too, what would Zechariah want you to do now? What would he want you to do? So instead of saying why and what ifs, we said what, and we knew exactly that we needed to be Zechariah's voice to try to bring hope to those that are dealing with the darkness that eventually took his life. So that's what we've done the last 6 years, is continue to be Zach's voice to inspire hope. And that's why we came up with our movement called Hope Lives in Northern Michigan, to inspire hope, to create a larger coalition of local nonprofits that are working for mental health awareness, suicide prevention, intervention, and awareness. And of course, that very vital part, the aftercare services for someone that has lost someone to suicide. That aftercare is so important, especially with loss to suicide. So that's what Hope does. We've partnered with several local nonprofits. We are not a nonprofit, but we help them with their getting the word out for their education and their support groups. And we also do fundraising for them. And then the money is directly donated to them from the organization or the company or the business that we've done our fundraising efforts with. It goes right directly to the nonprofits. So again, education and training, awareness is definitely the key. And we feel with Hope Lives in Northern Michigan that our work eventually, because we're fairly new. I started the Facebook page a year ago, this past August, and we've done some great things. And right now, Friday, Child and Family Services is offering a QPR Zoom training. You can still sign up for that. You can go to our Facebook page, Hope Lives in Northern Michigan, and find out about everything that's happening here locally. It's so important that we're taking care of our local nonprofits. These national organizations.
QPR is question, persuade, refer.
Thank you.
And,
Yes.
Yep, it's a good training. I've taken it myself
Right.
and well worth it.
Yes, and it's Zoom, so it's, you can do it in your jammies if you want to do it in your jammies with your coffee, right? Everybody's got to get their mug and have their coffee,
There
right?
you go. Absolutely. I'm
Yeah.
so glad, Janine, that you did, because one of my questions for you was going to be, family members. Suzanne and I facilitate a group called Stronger Together, which is for family members of those struggling with substance use disorder. And, like I told you, overdose a lot of times gets ruled as a suicide. And a lot of times then family members are kind of doubly shocked to put that label on there. And, when the question I was going to ask you was, well, what do you say to family members when, they're struggling with maybe guilt for not seeing some of the signs, beforehand? But you already answered that by the, whys and what ifs, not that, but the what. And I think that's just so true, is learning from the experience, as hard as those lessons are, and they are hard. And my mom was very much in denial about my sister's, well, just about pretty much everything, both her mental health issues and her substance use disorder. And she has learned so much since then, but I keep encouraging her. It's like Tim Shoecraft was saying, the conversations are what's important. And those conversations are hard. They're really hard, and they take practice. And the first time it may be hard to get your words out or what you want to say or the language right. But just because it's hard, we can't stop doing it.
Right.
We have to keep having the conversations.
Yeah, they are tough conversations. They're so tough, but it's so important that we continue with those conversations and not staying stuck. It's so easy, even in our depression, in my depression that I've dealt with my entire life, it's so easy to get stuck and to get stuck in that darkness. And it's so easy to say that the pain is temporary. But when you're dealing with that pain and you're in that pain,
doesn't feel that way.
No, it doesn't. But it is important that we don't stay stuck. We need to feel those feelings. We can't pack everything down. We need to feel all those feels and learn from them. And that's what we've done for the last 6 years. And then in continuing that conversation and making those connections, the connections that we've made the last 6 years have been life-saving for us. Do we still struggle? Absolutely, we still struggle. Will tomorrow be a terrible, hard day for me? It will be a very hard day for me. But it's so important that we have those connections and to have those conversations.
Yeah.
And to
You know,
say,
well, I was just going to say that I think once again, back to culture, you know, part of the reason those conversations are so hard is for many, many years, all of this stuff was, you know, and that goes back to the stigma is, oh, don't tell anybody. This is shameful, you know, this is, we don't want anybody to know that our family is dealing with this problem. And I know from my own experience, that's the way I was raised, is that nobody needs to know our dirty laundry, whether it's generational, you know, and when I say dirty laundry, it's a problem. And that's how it should be viewed. It's something that needs attention, not something that needs to be hidden away or whatever. And that's what my mom has, you know, had trouble with, is that's definitely the way she was raised, is you don't talk about these issues. And it's like, Mom, that's why what happened, a lot of it, because we didn't talk about it, you know. So once again, lead by example.
I wanted to bring up some statistics that I looked up. 20% of people who have died by suicide have either opioids, whether heroin or prescription painkillers in their system, and 22% alcohol. It involves alcohol, which are real high rates. And probably this is from 2016, so they're probably even higher in the moment. And that's not talking about meth, which there's real high statistics with meth. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about was that combination. So often we find family members will try to get help for their loved ones who have dual diagnosis. And, you know, we get them in to get help. And if they say that they don't have a problem, or whoever won't listen to the family to say, you know, so they know that there is an underlying mental health issue. It's not just the substance use disorder. So, but they always put the substance use disorder on top of the mental health issue, and it's hard to get help. Does anybody want to talk about that?
I just need to say that when I spoke at the FAN meeting, this subject I was just so, I can't even think of the word, the dual diagnosis part of it, that makes no sense to me, because the substance use disorder is mental health, right?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
no one could ever explain to me that being different. And I still, from that day, I came home and I told my husband, I said, we got to talk about this. It's just wrong.
I agree completely. I don't know how they are separated. I know that in my own personal experience, like they're absolutely one and the same. And I would not have been able to treat either one without treating them both. Trust me, I tried. And it's becomes a vicious circle of like the mental health symptoms occur because of the use occurs because of, and I'd say is like there was some of it that was fun addiction, like some of it was when I started using drugs, it was fun, but then it became self-medication because the stigma, I didn't want to ask for help, so I became convinced that I could fix it myself, and then that just like perpetuated both issues.
And why don't they listen to what the families have to say? Nobody knows individuals better than family members, you know, that have lived with them and stayed with them.
It's so sad. It's beyond sad.
If you ever look at Michigan's mental health code, a lot of that has to do with that lovely piece of work that really needs an overhaul, I think, in a lot of ways. And so a lot of our treatment professionals are bound by that mental health code in how they deliver services. And you know, it seems like these major systems that we have should be easy to change when we realize that it's not working. Yeah, not so much, you know, so it's little baby steps. I was thinking, just sitting here trying to think, there was a movie in the 80s, you know, so much of what we're talking about here, we all know that mental health and physical health are intertwined, and we've known that for a long time. And yet, because of our bureaucracy and our legal system and these major systems that take huge amounts of concerted effort and very powerful people to change, they don't get changed. So here we are. But this movie in the 80s, and I want to say, I can see the actor, but I can't think of who it was. Anyway, it's about a guy who struggles with alcohol use disorder. And the first line in the movie is, you know, is this the disease or the cure, and which started first? And just like Tim was saying, you know, in the beginning, he started drinking to blunt the effects of something that happened in his life that was pretty tragic and pretty disappointing. And then after a while, though, you know, the drinking became the major problem. So is it the disease or the cure? And I, in my experience, I think the reason that so often substance use disorder sort of gets treated in the realm of the physical part is that's how we train our doctors. We used to not train our doctors in that relationship between mental health and physical health. And, oh, this is what's wrong with the machine being your body. Oh, well, this is what we do to fix the machine. And we don't, you know, I'm not the computer expert that fixes the computer in the machine, being the brain. That's those other guys that went to a different kind of school kind of thing. And, you know, not everybody can be an expert on everything, but yeah, those working in silos and not realizing that crossover has been a problem.
Yeah,
And it continues to be a problem.
it
Well,
it
we've
does.
got about 20 minutes. Can we, Kim and Tim Hudson, you have anything to say about anything we've talked about? Kim?
Well, Janine knows how I feel about her situation because I've seen it played out way too many times at Munson. You know, it's sad, and that's one of the biggest reasons why I quit the healthcare system, because there's nothing moving too quickly, and I just felt like there was no answers in the ER or in the hospital because everybody's so focused on COVID that nobody really cares about anything else that's going on around them. People that come in with like overdoses or are, you know, extremely drunk or with any kind of substance use disorder is looked at like a pain in the ass, and they just want them out of there because they're not what they say, they're not a detox center, and they're not a rehab, and they're a hospital. And so, you know, a lot of people that come in there don't meet their criteria unless you are extremely suicidal with a written plan or a plan in hand, or are homicidal with, you know, with I mean, basically you have to prove that you are going to do this, or they will let you go. I've seen it quite a few times. And the biggest part that sucks is like you hold on to an iPad, and the person that's sitting on the other end of the iPad, the community mental health worker, you know, only sees about 20 minutes of what is going on with that client. And I have watched in 2 separate occasions those 2 different clients pretend that they were okay because they wanted to go out and have a cigarette. And so or that they needed to just go, they just, you know, they can change their demeanor. And then I watch a girl, you know, set the iPad down and then just go berserk and started throwing herself up against the wall and all of that stuff. And then, you know, they say, well, she doesn't qualify because of this, this, and this, but they don't see her as like an like what she's doing completely. They just see what she's doing that 20 minutes that they're on that little iPad, which is disgusting to me. We really need a change in our healthcare. And right now, seriously, they're still just so devoted to COVID and what they're going to do about COVID that anything else that comes in is just overlooked. And it's really sad.
Well, I have a theory. It's kind of, I don't know, maybe a little bit out there, but as far as the physical health, mental health distinction goes, in our society, mental or physical health is so prioritized, and so the people who treat it, physicians, are paid so much more because that treatment puts us back at work. And mental health substance use treatment makes us realize that we want more out of life. And it's that sort of disparity that occurs because it kind of challenges our system as a whole. And I mean, yet that with the coming into the ER and the plan there, that's like expecting them to, this patient to be comfortable enough to say this to a complete stranger after they've already felt that they've just been a nuisance to the staff. And then they haven't, there's only been a slight, maybe an indirect admission of the pain to their family. But then they're going to be very direct and state their plan with a stranger who seems like they don't want them there.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, when I
Go ahead.
I've got a
when I worked for Children Protective Services, we saw that pretty frequently, where there would be kids who would be making suicidal threats and talking about it, and you know, they'd go to the ED, and like you guys have said, unless they repeat that exact threat while they're sitting there talking to a stranger, often with having security standing outside of the door and all types of people you don't know staring at you, they're not going to give you any services. They're just going to say, well, this person's fine, the kid's fine, they can go. And essentially you're just waiting then for something to actually physically happen to the child before something help is available. There's a couple of things I was thinking of while everybody was talking. Talking about referring to it as a selfish act. You know, that's something that's always kind of bothered me when I hear. I've had a friend and a couple of family members lose their life to suicide, and certainly we know that part of one of the stages of grief is anger, and you know, hearing people I know refer to it as a selfish act, that's kind of what I've always attributed to, as it's part of their anger with the situation. But so much of that, you're losing things that we could learn by thinking about the pain that person obviously was experiencing. And, you know, when you think about that, the pain that they were in, and reflecting on that, what are signs that, you know, maybe we can learn from in the future and help other people? The other piece is something that Suzanne brought up about substance use, and how, you know, we cited some statistics on substance use where people have lost their life to suicide. And, you know, I'm just thinking about from like a data standpoint, you know, are we losing some information that's out there on how prevalent substance use is? Because we've had some conversations about, and I think it kind of varies by medical examiner, that, you know, when an overdose takes place, is it on the death certificate reflect a suicide? Is it going to reflect accidental overdose? You know, when the suicide occurs, certainly could make the argument that if there's substance use present, that played a role in what happened. And, you know, if it's not recognized on a death certificate, it's like it didn't happen from a statistical standpoint, and so much funding is based on those statistics. And I was just thinking about, you know, we think the numbers are really high, but in reality, it's probably underreported in what we truly have, if that makes sense.
Well, and again, talking about the death certificate and what the coroner, whoever, the doctor, whatever, puts on that death certificate, does it even need to be suicide? Why can't it be, if someone dies because of cancer, they died because of an illness, because of as a result of the symptoms or side effects from cancer. You know,
Right.
Why
Why
can't-
can't
why-
they put
From a
mental
symptom
illness or
standpoint,
right,
it's
like because of a mental health issue, or, you know, it's a health issue. It's not, I mean, we call it suicide, but if we call it what it is, what we should be calling it, a mental health issue. My son died because of an illness. And again, talking about the funding and how that
Yep.
all works and
the
intertwined.
legalities? You know,
Right.
once upon a time, if that's what they put on your death certificate, then your life insurance wouldn't pay out. And
Yeah.
there were, you know, which my brother-in-law, he was very, you know, on top of losing his wife. Then that added anxiety was there, because that's what he was very worried about then was, okay, well, her life insurance, because you know, the medical community meant extra links to try and keep her alive, and she was on life support, and that's all very expensive. And you know, that's why it just aggravates me so much when so many of our systems come down to the money issue.
It's always, it's always the dollar.
And so the treatment people get, you know, and then so and I was going to say, Timothy, maybe because you do work as in the medical examiner's office, you know, how are those decisions made on what goes on a death certificate?
So it would vary by, so the state's kind of broken up into different teams of medical examiners. Grand Traverse County falls under Western Michigan's medical examiner's office, which is out of Kalamazoo, and there's 11 counties that are part of that. I'm not sure if Kalkaska's medical examiner just has Kalkaska, or if they have several counties. I'm not sure, but kind of each team there, they probably have their own policies and guidelines. And you know, here in Grand Traverse County and Leelanau County, I would say that it really would just depend on the individual situation. And in my experience, I have not seen an overdose be labeled on a death certificate as suicide unless there was a note that was left describing intent, or, you know, possibly a recent ideation where those types of threats were expressed. Otherwise, it would be put down as an accidental overdose. But again, that's kind of left up to interpretation of those teams of medical examiners. And you know, the investigator that's on scene would obviously look into those things and kind of come up with a determination. But I agree. I know other counties don't do it that way.
And really, personally, I mean, the notion of the death certificate is kind of just from a personal position, it's kind of bizarre. But it's kind of like a record keeping thing. And unless there is something like a note present or something explicitly stated, how do you know?
Right.
And
that's what they struggled with my sister. There was no note. She got up and went to work that day. You know, she took a bunch of over-the-counter pills and drank a whole bunch of hand sanitizer, and you know, that was it. And so in trying to help my mom through this, you know, because when she saw that, it was like, you know, Mom, I don't think this was premeditated. And so, but the fact that our systems, for whatever reason, felt the need to, you know, put that document on there. And that's, you know, that's the kind of stuff that I think with our mental health code and our how we do things, we need to look at and say, just like you were saying, Janine, is that necessary? Why is that necessary? You know, it reminds me of a place I used to work years ago. They used to have us make 4 copies of these documents, these intake documents. And I got curious because I was spending a lot of time making these copies. And it's like, so what do y'all do with these copies once I make them and send them to you? And they said, well, we put them in that cabinet over there. I said, yeah, what do you do with them for that? You know, oh, nothing. We just put them over there. Well, do you need them for anything? No. And so I quit making them. And my other folks that were doing the same job, they're like, oh, you're getting your work done a lot faster. And I said, yeah, I quit making all those copies because they don't do anything with them. And then pretty soon everybody else quit making those copies, you know? So sometimes we need to ask, just like you said, Janine, well, what's that for? If it's not for anything, let's stop doing it, you know?
Yeah.
I know my cousin, she died by suicide a few years back. She had a severe alcohol use disorder and an opioid use disorder. And she was threatening to her husband, who was out of town at the time. He's actually out of state. And he called the police, not once, but twice, because she was calling people to say she loved them. And I was one of the people she called, and I didn't catch on at all. And so that night she broke into where the medications were locked up because she had a caretaker there, which was just a friend. And she broke in and grabbed all her medication. Apparently took it, went down to McDonald's, grabbed something to drink, which was just a block down the road, and walked back by the house and collapsed in a field. And they found her the next day. But why were the police called twice before they did anything? I mean, the person there was saying that she's threatening this. Her husband is saying she's threatening this. People were calling him saying she's calling people saying she loved them. Why did they not take her somewhere safe?
Right. And that's where
And
education
all it is it's
yeah,
because when they showed up, she said, "I'm fine."
yeah, right. And again, yeah, right. And they do that, right? But again, it goes back to education and trainings, and especially for our first responders. If they don't know how to respond to someone that's in a mental health crisis, it can go completely wrong. So again, when I think about education, awareness, trainings, it's so important. It's everybody's job. And I would say especially our first responders and our police officers. It's so important that they get the help and the training that they need, and the help and the support that they need with everything that they're seeing because of their because of their PTSD. I so encourage them to get rid of that stigma and get the help that they need. So.
And Suzanne, I'm not familiar with this. You maybe I am. For as far as the mental health petition goes, does a family member's testimony count?
I don't know. I tried to get help for my son recently. I actually went over to community mental health. I did all the paperwork. A judge agreed with me. They picked him up. They brought him to the hospital. He got to the hospital, said he was fine. They decided it was more substance use disorder, not looking at the underlying condition, and they let him go. And he caused havoc around the community. Now he's looking at prison time. They would have got him the help he needed at the time. We might not be looking at what we're doing, what we're looking at now.
Yeah, and I mean, from the patient's or standpoint, from his standpoint at that point, in that state of mind, it may not be possible to really distinguish. The substance use disorder certainly seems like the more immediate, because that mental health crisis, that mental health issue has been so persistent. It's been a thing for so long that it's almost normal. That's what life is. And so when it's that, it's just it's normal. But then when substance use is added in, it is. I know from my experience when I was in similar situations, it was it was the problem at the time, because my mental health had been a problem for so long that it didn't feel like it was out of the normal. And so when they asked, "How do you feel?" it was like, well, I'm fine because I'm normal. And just in that situation, the parents, the family, the loved ones, their perspective is invaluable. There are so many times when I didn't even know, I realized I had a problem with whether it be mental health or substance use, until family, friends, loved ones made me aware of the things I was doing and the way I was behaving, the thoughts that I was articulating. Because that state of mind is so, it becomes impossible really to introspect too far.
And
Yeah,
when you take somebody that has a mental health issue and you put them on a substance like say meth, it makes things worse. I mean, the anger and the aggravation, and then they start going into psychosis, and from what I'm hearing, they send people home in the middle of psychosis because it's drug related. It's drug related. It's
Drug
not,
induced.
yeah, it's drug induced psychosis, but they're still cutting them loose and they're out
And
walking around.
what's the difference? It's still psychosis.
Exactly.
Is it any
Exactly.
less of a threat because it's drug induced? If
No.
anything, I mean, it may be more.
Yeah,
I don't
isn't
think
it?
they really care. It's just a pain in the ass and they want you out the door. I've seen it way too often. It's like, they're like, oh, this is a substance use disorder. You can call,
All
an
ATS.
MRE in the morning or call ATS for detox,
Right.
blah, blah, blah.
But
They'll
you
let
don't
'em go.
detox off meth. There's no medical detox for meth. So, and you
Yeah.
can't, and a lot of your treatment centers don't want to deal with it because they're in psychosis and they can be violent.
I've encountered that situation before working with patients where mental health facilities won't accept because substance use is too severe, and substance use facilities won't accept because mental health is too severe. And to the point where like they're the same thing. I mean, sure, like not everyone with mental health concerns, excuse me, has a substance use disorder, but I don't think it works the other way.
Right.
I think that the substance use disorder is a form of a mental health issue. But in that sort of situation, it is just like, I mean, I remember working with one patient in particular where this went on for months, where he was begging for help and we could not find anywhere that would take him.
Isn't that so sad? When you think about that, we've talked to families the last 6 years that finally have gotten their child to admit they need help, right? Or maybe it's an adult child or a family member finally say, yes, I can't do this on my own anymore. I need help. And they bring them to the ED, and the ED says, sorry, we don't have a bed for you. You'll have to make an appointment. Well, maybe you can't get an appointment for 6 weeks, right? Can you imagine if you brought your child or your adult child or a friend to the ED, they're having a heart attack, and they say to you, we're so sorry, but we don't have a bed for you. You'll have to make an appointment and come back in 6 weeks. Can you imagine what this country would be doing?
That's a great point.
But that's exactly what they're doing to people that are dealing with their mental health, having a mental health crisis. It's unacceptable, and I don't know how to change it. I do know that more voices, and we're together, we're stronger. We know that, but that is so unacceptable. But that's what's happening, and a lot of people don't know that. And so it's so important that we're talking about it and making people aware that this is exactly what's happening. And it's completely unacceptable.
That's an excellent way to illustrate it, but I've never thought of or come across with a heart attack. And if somebody showed up at the ED and they said, sorry, no bed.
A
But
good
yeah, I mean, to
resource.
that point,
A good
that-
resource in Traverse City is the National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI. They were around in Traverse City, and then they went away for a little while, and now they're back kind of with a vengeance, and they're doing some really great advocacy work. And that's the hard part is, like I said, we all know and see this, but how do we make the change? And getting involved in groups like that go down to Lansing and give public comment, during open public comment times, so that some of the money and the power makers and the decision makers also know what we know. And it takes dedication. It really does. And it keeps keep telling those stories, keep talking to people.
And
NAMI is
if you think about any other health crisis or really anything, in 2020, the estimates are that 93,000 people died of drug overdose. If you take any other issue and say 93,000 people have died this year, there would be issues. People would do things, like it would be something that was made a #1 priority.
Mhm.
But with substance use disorder, it's just about not spoken of.
What training was it we were at, Suzanne? I can't remember. Somebody, because we go to so many, who was a pretty heavy hitter, talked about that. We managed to shut an entire country down in 2 weeks with COVID when it first started, and yet we have not been able to get a handle on some of these problems, like our lack of mental health care. Why is
I remember someone saying that, but I don't remember who it was, but
yeah, I can't either off the top of my head, but that's one of those nuggets that you file away and say, if I don't get anything else out of this training, that's true. We can make that happen, and we can dump money, all over the place and make things happen and develop a vaccine in record time. And yet we've made very little inroads in solving our mental health crisis.
right. It's
And one of the physicians with Michigan Opioid Collaborative, she's a psychiatrist. She actually said it really well one time, that with mental health and substance use disorder, as opposed to any other health concern, it's the case that the sicker you are, the less treatment becomes available.
True.
sad, very, very sad, isn't it?
It
Beyond-
is.
on that note, we're past time. We're at 12:45. I want to thank everybody for being here. I got to run over to the Kalkaska Farmers Market and set up all my information. I just thank you all for being here. This was it was a great conversation.
Thank you,
Lisa,
Janine.
Yes, thank you,
Seriously,
Janine. Thank you.
you're awesome.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
We'll
Yep.
let you know
Love
what
you,
our
girl.
conversation is going to be next month.
Take care, everyone.
Here, remember, you matter.
We really want to thank everybody here
Yeah,
for their time
absolutely.
today and their expertise. I think this has been a productive conversation, and we look forward to future collaborations.
Yeah, absolutely.